صباح الخير. Good morning. I think I'll speak in Arabic, but there's simultaneous translation. صباح الخير.
Good morning, my name is Issam Nassar. I'll be moderating this session, which promises to have some very valuable introductions. I will introduce each speaker before they start speaking. We'll start with Dr. Ghattas Sayej. He is a Palestinian archaeologist. He graduated from Birzeit University in 1992. He got his MA from Bergen University and PhD from Lamtrop in Australia. And through his previous experiences, he worked in Palestine and West Bank in particular. He gained extensive knowledge on the political struggle surrounding the archaeology of the region. We welcome Dr. Ghattas. You have 20 minutes. طابة صباح.
صباح الخير بالجميع. راح أحكي المحاضرة بالإنجليزي فسامحوني. Here we go. My paper is about the cultural heritage of Palestine, and we will see how we will divide the work. The aims of this paper are divided into 4 major points. The first point is to shed a light on how is looting flourishing in the Palestinian territories and why. The second point, I will talk about why the Palestinians do not see the value of their own cultural heritage. And the third point, which is the major point that I will have focus on, is how the Israeli settlers are trying to fabricate the evidence to prove their right to colonize the remaining part of Palestine. In the end, I will have some suggestions and concluding remarks. But before starting about cultural heritage, we need to talk about politics, because Palestine, as you know, it's a complex issue. We are not talking about corrupt regime, we are talking about a nation who is trying to take the other nation, basically. I will not talk about everything in details. I will have a focus only on the West Bank. I will not talk about Gaza. I will not talk about the historical part of Palestine. And according to Oslo Accord, the West Bank was divided into 3 major points: area A, B, and C. What that's supposed to mean. If you look at this map, you will see what we are talking about. Area A includes the main Palestinian cities and covers more or less 18.2% of the West Bank. The responsibility for the cultural heritage in these areas belong to the Palestinian Authority. Area B includes most of the Palestinian villages and towns and covers more or less 21.8%. In principle, the Palestinian Authority is responsible for the cultural heritage in these areas, but it cannot control the area for various political reasons, as I will mention afterwards. Area C includes the rest of the West Bank, more or less 60%. The Israeli authorities are responsible for these areas, and here illegal digging of archaeological sites are constantly increasing. Why? Oops, sorry. Siri lives her life. The first reason is political instability. Plundering increases in Area C without any hinder. There is no authority which can stop them. On the contrary, they motivate them to dig. Poverty, of course. Many dream of discovering a treasure that will enrich them and secure the future of their family. And we just need to remember that the trade in antiquities is classified as the 3rd largest global market after drugs and weapons. So we are talking about major multi-billion industry. Ignorance and lack of knowledge. I took 3 pictures, one from a school in Gaza after the last war in 2015, and you see how they educate their children. And if I look at this photo, I start thinking, do you think the teacher has any ability to speak about cultural heritage under these conditions? I doubt it. The second photo is from the UN refugee camp in the West Bank, how they teach the children. Again, I don't think the teacher is aware of what is cultural heritage. And the third photo that you see is from the private school in Ramallah, where you have the mixture between gender. There is more or less some hope, but they do not have the focus on it. So here we have to do a work. To supply archaeological objects to the market due to increased demands. If we look here at some photos from the old city of Jerusalem, we have plenty, dozens of stores that they are licensed and they are allowed to sell movable objects, artifacts to whomever paid the price. And why is that so? Here is the problem. Israeli law allows the sale of antiquities as long as the store is licensed by the Israeli Antiquity Authority. If we look at the old city of Jerusalem, you see these small stars. There are dozens of stores that they sell legally in the old city of Jerusalem. It's not only there. We have also in Tel Aviv as well as in Haifa. Covering markets requirements. The demand for antiquities is very high, and prices, no matter how high, are not an obstacle for the buyer. But where do these antiquities come from? Many from looted sites in the West Bank, Gaza, Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. Antiquities move across borders in different ways, and this is a photo from the bridge between Jordan and Jericho, and even in diplomatic vehicles. In 6th of June 2016, the driver of the Norwegian embassy busted with 10 kilos of antiquities from Jordan toward the West Bank. That was quite embarrassing because I presented this lecture in Norway, and if you just have a look at the Norwegians, how they reacted. They were very embarrassed, but unfortunately, it's reality. Who buys these artifacts? Visitors and locals. And here we have one store from the old city of Amman. Pilgrims wishing to obtain an artifact from the Holy Land, souvenir from the Holy Land. And here we have a major issues. More than 75 or almost 80% of what is sold go to this type of people. The global market, such as in New York, London, and Paris, Hobby Lobby does most of the job in the US, and the British stores as well. Moshe Dayan, I don't know how many of you have heard about this name. He was the defense minister of Israel during the 1967 war, and he was the defense minister at that time. And he is, or was, the largest collector of antiquities in the history of Israel. He used the army to go and rob archaeological sites in the West Bank and gather it to his own collection. And when he died, his wife sold his collection to the market as well as to the Israeli antiquities in Jerusalem. But actually, these objects belong to the Palestinians because he stole it from the West Bank, and it's documented. This vase was sold in 2019, and the price was estimated between, I just have to remove my glasses, 400 to 600,000 US dollars. And no one knows who bought it, and no one knows how much they paid for it. The other objects from Iraq were sold in 2019. The Israeli Museum itself has many of these masks which came from the West Bank, and they actually refer to them. They came from Judea and Samaria. Well, where? From which site? Who excavated them? It's actually occupied territories. This mask is from the Neolithic period, and there are only 15 we know about them. which were discovered, and this one is from the Hebron area. Now, I changed the first part. I will just jump directly to the second part, which is systematic falsification of evidence. I will use two examples. The first is from Nabi Samuel, and the other one is the Tel Bernat. Nabi Samuel, this site is located in the village of Nabi Samuel, northwest of Jerusalem, dated back to the Byzantine period, when the first church was established. The Crusaders established a large headquarters and built a large church. The site includes numerous quarries in the west, horse stables in the north, residential remains in the east and south, and the church in the center of the site. The church was converted into a mosque during the Mamluk period. The Israeli Antiquities converted the entire archaeological site into a national park in the mid of the 1990s. Today, the Jewish settlers use the mosque as a synagogue to practice their religious rituals. Church, mosque, synagogue. Is it familiar? Other places they did exactly the same, sometimes in the opposite way. Falsification of evidence is clearly, and I will have a focus here. In the 1990s, the staff officer for archaeology of the civil administration of Judea and Samaria excavated the site to integrate it into a national park. During these excavations, it was clear that some Israeli archaeologists searched for certain layers and neglected others. I witnessed this pattern with my own eyes during my participation in the excavation season of the 1993 and the 1994, when nearly 1,000-year-old archaeological layers belonging to the Islamic periods were bulldozed in the northern part to uncover the remains of the Crusader horse stables. And nearly 2,000 years of Byzantine and Islamic layers were bulldozed in the southern and eastern part to reach the lower layers. I asked the staff officer and his assistant, who was supervising the excavations, about the reason for doing so. Their answers were as follows. We have 6 million shekels, and we must finish the excavations before the budget runs out, and therefore we must follow the project's objectives. Well, read between quotations, the proper layer. One may wonder about the core issue of being archaeologists and which agenda we are implementing. Are we archaeologists who care about our systematic field without considering the political factors? Or are we a part of a large political agenda? The supervisors claimed that they found layers from the Maccabeans who revolt against the Greeks in 165 BC. But unfortunately, there is no evidence for such claim, and there are no scientific publications to present the finds. And even this claim was rejected by one of the Israeli colleagues who worked at the site, who stated they showed an archaeological layer dating back to the Maccabean period, but do not ask about the evidence to prove such claim. Hence, this act is falsification of archaeological evidence to link the past to the present and to impose a new reality. I mean, to prove that this land is an essential part of the Jewish identity and heritage. My second example is Tel Bernat, which is located on the top of the Mount Ebal, north of the city of Nablus. The site was excavated by an Israeli archaeologist called Adam Zertal in 1987, who attributed the site to the altar of Joshua, because it's mentioned in the Old Testament, as you can see. Archaeologists have rejected Zertal's claim that this site is an altar of Joshua, as is no evidence to prove such a claim. The nature of architectural construction directly contradicts that this building is an altar or a temple. Despite the lack of sufficient evidence, the Israeli settlers adapted this interpretation to prove the presence of Jews in all ancient Palestine. This site has been used as a gathering point for the settler movements in the West Bank since the beginning of 2019. The settlers began their own campaign to influence the Israeli public opinion that archaeological sites in the West Bank shows the historical connections between the Jews and their land. The Palestinians do not belong to the past, and that they are just interested in destroying the Jewish cultural heritage. Therefore, it is necessary for the Jewish settlers to control this site and the land surrounding it, because they have more right to this land than the Palestinians, who owns the past or the land. However, let's have a look at these claims. An attempt was made to link the Jewish heritage with the site at Tel Bernat in 2019, as the settlers tried to collect the soil that was excavated in 1987 and transported it to the nearby Israeli settlement to sift it and to find some evidence proving this connection. Why wasn't this work done on site? And here is the surprise. They found a lead tablet 2 by 2 centimeters. This tablet was discovered in a soil dumped nearby the excavated site for 36 years ago, basically not in situ, and could be from anywhere else. In March 22, an article was published in the Time of Israel claiming that the oldest Hebrew text has been discovered in this site. Interpreting one of the ancient letters discovering in this site as being ancient Hebrew doesn't necessarily mean that the site belongs to the Jews. And even if you look at this letter, as you can see in the corner here, you have the ancient Hebrew, Greek alphabet, Roman alphabet. It looks exactly the same. The question, how you look at it. So what is what? In 2021, a small part of the surrounding wall was vandalized by unknown persons. As you can see in the circle, the settlers took advantage of this incident to make media uproar in Israel to prove that the Palestinians were the ones who destroyed this wall to erase the Jewish heritage of the site, a claim that was adapted in several political speeches by the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli President. The settlers took advantage of this incident to show that the Palestinians deliberately vandalized the wall of this site to eliminate the Jewish heritage. This claim was confirmed by the special report published by the settlers, which shows that 80% of the archaeological sites in the West Bank were destroyed by Palestinians. The report doesn't refer to any evidence that vandalism occurs indeed by Palestinians. In addition, the report denies any settlers' connection with this destruction, as it is unreasonable for settlers to destroy their own cultural past. These claims lack any concrete evidence and are clearly politically motivated. Although the settlers' claims were not proven, they were able to gain sympathy among the Israelis. In February 2022, Tel Bernat was presented as an example for the deliberate destruction of archaeological sites and the Jewish heritage by Palestinians. In March 22, an article was published in an Israeli newspaper claiming that the oldest Hebrew text has been discovered in this site. In April 22, a religious ceremony was held at the site, attended by many Israelis from all over the country. What is next? Confiscating the entire areas to build an Israeli settlement? No worries. Time will show. We will see. Suggestions. These two examples, they show what is going on, that we have a political goal behind everything. So what is our humanitarian role as archaeologists? Is it reasonable for the entire world to remain silent against the crime because of our feeling of guilt to what happened to the Jews by the Nazis? Solutions: we need to have a better education. We spoke about it yesterday, and I don't have enough time to discuss it, but we have two leadership, one in Gaza and one in the West Bank, and we have a sign here with two arrows, and this is exactly the situation in Palestine today. We do not have leadership. Political pressure on Israel to change antiquity laws, and we have to convince our visitors to respect us, to respect our cultural heritage. Come and visit, and you do not have to buy a piece of archaeological antiquities as a souvenir from the Holy Land. The Palestinians, they need to form a national committee that works on the following: documenting and repatriating all archaeological materials, demanding the return of all stolen objects, and increasing awareness among the inhabitants of Palestine. And this is my last slide, which I will stop here because it's very important. What is the cultural heritage that brings Palestinians together? Is it tradition? Is it religion? Or the history and archaeology? Who is who? If I was a Jewish, I most likely converted to Christianity when Jesus came, and most likely I converted to Islam when the Muslims came. So I am the same person who can have three religions, and this is exactly what is happening in Palestine. If we take any DNA test or whatever you want to wish, who is the original Israelites who were in the country? Most likely the Palestinians who live there today. And I have written an article which was published 2 years ago about the ethnicity of Palestine, where it shows clearly that most of the European Jews who came from the Eastern Europe, the Ukraine, they were converted from the Khazar on the 8th century AD. So they have absolutely nothing to do with the Israelites who were actually in Palestine at that time, 1200 before Christ. So what is the intended reason for dividing archaeological sites into Jewish, Byzantine, Islamic, Crusader, Ottoman, etc., or Canaanite, early Israelite, and so forth? Isn't it better to deal with all these decisions and ancient civilization from the Stone Ages to the contemporary period as common civilization, as an integrated mixture of the nature of Palestinian rich cultural heritage? The Palestinians should preserve this mosaic of cultures without dividing it according to specific political goals. This is the national wealth of the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Ghattas, for this enlightening talk. Our next speaker is Mekarem Eljamal. Sorry, I'll speak in Arabic. المتحدث.
The next speaker is Mekarem Eljamal, and she's a doctoral student at the architectural department at the Columbia University in the USA. She is an urban planner, especially when it comes to the mixed cities within the Green Line. She pursues the societal composition of those cities and new liberalism. And Mekarem Eljamal is the head editor of an educational initiative, and she's also an editor at large at History at Work. Please, the floor is yours, and the lady will be talking about mixed city, the place of cultural heritage site in conceptualizing the mixed city. شكر جزيل الشكر لنور وزينات لتنظيم هذا المؤتمر. البارحة كان يوما مميزا وأتطلع للجلسات التالية. تغير العنوان بعض الشيء.
So it's a mixed city or an ancient historical city, the malleable place of cultural heritage sites in Lid's discursive identity. And so before I delve into the core of my presentation, I wanted to situate us geographically. So Professor Dechasari talked about the West Bank yesterday, and I'm bringing us into 48 Palestine to Lid, a town 15 kilometers southeast of Tel Aviv Yaffa. In the Ramat Eshkol neighborhood of Lid, hidden behind unkempt and overgrown grasses, is a small entry point into a building of the Hassouna family olive press. Constructed during the late Ottoman period, operating through the British Mandate era and abandoned since the Nakba, the Hassouna olive mill, as well as a soap factory building by the Old City, have been haphazardly cordoned off and left to exist without any caretaking by the state or municipality. These sites and their ruination stand in stark contrast to the recently opened Shelby White and Leon Levy Lid Mosaic Archaeological Center, located a few blocks away, which displays a late 3rd century Roman mosaic. 25 years after the mosaic was discovered and following a world tour that brought this piece of heritage to premier museums in New York and Paris, the mosaic is now returned to Lid and is viewable to the public. It is against this backdrop of the museum opening that this discussion of malleable and intertwined nature of heritage and the mixed city classification, sits. With the establishment of the Shelby White and Leon Levy Lid Archaeological Center, the municipal authorities' work in defining and constructing a discursive identity for Lid through heritage comes to the fore. This paper, though, does not center the particular histories that are represented by individual heritage sites. Rather, it turns attention to the way in which they are leveraged by the municipal authorities. Identity for a city is an incredibly amorphous and abstract concept, intimately intertwined and reminiscent of Henri Lefebvre's discussion of space and spatial production. A city's space's identity is produced, reproduced, and interpreted in a variety of ways by the communities, institutions, and the many other actors within the city. I use the term discursive identity to both signal the realm of leveraging that I'm talking about, so rhetoric, and its instability, and that it cannot be considered a rooted and firm reality. This paper does not seek to uphold or advocate for the official or discursive identities that I'm talking to and how they apply and are constructed in Lid, but rather I open the floor for an exploration into how one component of the city, its heritage, enables an understanding of the ways in which particular spatial identities are constructed and prioritized or deprioritized. For the case of Lid, which emerges through reviewing discourses of heritage since the opening of the Shelby White and Leon Levy Mosaic Archaeological Center, it is how heritage functions as a vehicle to construct and deploy Lid's discursive identity as an ancient historical city, relegating its official classification as a mixed city to secondary importance. So, Lid is one of the 8 officially recognized mixed cities of Israel, a label that denotes a municipality as having a significant Palestinian minority population amongst a decisive Jewish majority. So cities such as Haifa, Tel Aviv-Yaffa, and Jerusalem are also on this mixed cities list. Each of these cities, though, have an incredibly varied discursive identity attached to them in addition to this official classification. So for Tel Aviv-Yaffa, the city is often represented as this cosmopolitan haven with something to please all. And in contrast, Haifa is understood as an urban oasis with calming panoramic views. So you can see some of the discursive identities on the slide here. But in addition to these kind of subjective and divergent identities for these cities, there are wildly varying demographics for these cities that hold this classification, ranging from 30% Palestinian population in Lid to only 4.8% Palestinian population in Tel Aviv-Yaffa, and those are 2021 statistics, which raises the question of what precise benchmarks the state of Israel uses for this categorization. But more importantly, the lack of parity amongst mixed cities points to the need to understand this classification as a political classification. The nature of that political classification is never static, with politics being an ever-evolving process of relations. But so too, though, is heritage, and which has been brought up throughout the conference thus far, as we ask questions of who chooses what is considered to be heritage, who gets to construct the narrative around these sites. So more significantly into this inquiry of heritage management in Lid and Lid's identity as a mixed city is how the process of heritage becomes a filter to understand the present moment. So in light of what David Harvey says in his view of heritage as a process, one which must be situated in respective political and social contexts, this exploration into Lid's heritage management as it relates to the contemporary identity as a mixed city, asks whether the present classification of a mixed city is being fostered and upheld through heritage management processes, or whether the classification has little bearing on heritage discourse in Lid. So as Chiara de Cesari and Michael Hertzfield described, the management of heritage enables particular constructions of power and sovereignty. Urban planning is one such enactment of power by varied entities. So when we're looking at heritage management, key participants include a variety of municipal organizations, departments, private companies, nonprofit organizations, and grassroots organizations. This paper focuses on the first three actors. So municipal offices, private entities, and nonprofit companies, with particular emphasis on municipal authorities given their entanglement and the way contracts work with private entities, and how heritage management occurs in Lid's old city to construct a very particular discursive identity for the city. So representing and defining Lid's identity can be gleaned through a variety of formats, from mayoral speeches, interviews, to official municipal communications and tourism materials. When considering the role of a city's identity, its visibility and accessibility are vital components. As such, official and digitally published materials comprise the base source material for this inquiry, rather than turning to individualized materials such as one-on-one interviews. Heritage management, while not solely undertaken by public entities, is a public-facing project. It shapes the access to, appearance of, and narratives behind historical sites. Through textual analysis of Lid's municipal websites, mentionings of heritage, most notably the Roman mosaic and its new museum, municipal urban renewal documents, and the Shelby White and Leon Levy Lid Mosaic Archaeological Museum's website, I trace the contours of Lid's identity as understood through heritage. Previous observations and walkthroughs of the heritage sites from 2 to 3 years ago serve as the basis for understanding the physical state of these sites. So the museum presents itself and the mosaic contained within it as sitting within a sparse urban fabric. The geographic description of the museum represents the area's loosely populated, empty. However, this area contains both densely populated apartment buildings as well as single-family homes within a few meters of the museum's doorstep. So when you read deeper into the sparse urban fabric description, is also a claim of the area having nothing of note. It's empty of activities and people that would enliven the space. Thus, the museum's location serves a dual purpose of both keeping the mosaic in situ, but also opening the city and reinvigorating the area as if it was dead. The museum and the history it contains welcomes the people to Lid. It becomes a landmark that marks Lid's entrance and defines Lid as a significant locale. Making such implications more explicit, the planning principles guiding the museum's construction site state, quote, "The site will become a landmark close to the Guinatun Junction entrance to the city and will serve as a departure point from which to tour the historic ancient city," end quote. Both affirming the museum's significance to the city as a whole and explicitly naming this particular identity for Lid. The museum, though, is set to be more than just a metaphorical gateway to Lid. It is also set to become the tourism and cultural center as a physical institution for Lid writ large. So this new identity for Lid, though, is one that had the capacity to be leveraged prior to the opening of the new Mosaic Museum. Heritage sites sit across the city, exude a similar historicity for the city, but have existed prior to the unveiling of the museum as well as prior to the discovery of the mosaic. The featured tourist attractions on the municipal website include the House of Arches, the Ottoman soap factory that I've mentioned before, Khan el Helou, and the adjoined Omari Mosque and St. George Orthodox Church. A majority of the heritage sites listed by the municipality are concentrated within Lid's Old City, with others scattered in adjacent neighborhoods. As part of crafting Lid's identity as a historic ancient city, the geographic proximity of these heritage sites is emphasized by both the municipality and the museum. When situating the mosaic within the existing built environment of Lid, The museum also indicates the locations of these structures in an urban connection map, so motioning towards this idea of cohesion and unity amongst all of these sites. They are to be understood as individual units in the whole that is the ancient historic city of Lid. Furthermore, Lid Mayor Yair Ravivo references these same sites and reiterates the interrelation between them as he discusses the urban development projects that are structured around these heritage sites, with the museum standing as the gateway to the landscape of timeless history. So despite the implied intercommunal interactions and mixing attached to these other aforementioned heritage sites and the histories that they recall, the invocation of Lid's classification as a mixed city comes only once in the official recorded announcements around the museum's opening, and that reference merely is a passing comment. At a committee meeting regarding the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the museum, Ravivo stated, quote, "Very soon our dream for the city, which itself is a mosaic of cultures, will come true when we inaugurate in Lid one of the most important museums in the country, which will place Lid on the national map of cultures," end quote. So reading into the mosaic of cultures is an analogy to the official mixed city classification of Lid. Ravivo attempts to give a nod to the other heritage sites that he positions as representing the diverse demographics of Lid. However, the pinnacle to Lid's identity as a historic site, in the way that Ravivo discusses it, remains to be the Roman mosaic, and the mosaic's presence is sufficient enough to solidify the ancient historical city identity as restoration activities for the old city of Lid, Khan el-Hilo, and House of Arches has been promised but yet to be underway. What Ravivo's comments bring to the fore is a question of why Lid's branding as a historical city, worthy of being a key tourism destination, comes only with the inauguration of this new museum, when these other sites have been both known about for longer than the Lid mosaic and have been far more accessible, given that they do not require the same levels of excavation as the buried mosaic did. So, shifting gears slightly, sorry, I realized I didn't move all the way through this. But shifting gears slightly to the intersection of heritage with urban planning. The heritage management for Lid Mosaic was explicitly about preservation of the site, as well as using it as a source of education and community development. In contrast, though, heritage management for sites like the soap factory, Khan el-Hilo, and House of Arches did not place preservation at the forefront. Heritage management instead manifests as urban renewal, a categorization of projects already laden with histories of destruction. In contrast to the architectural plans for the Lid Mosaic Museum, which revolved around particularities of viewing the mosaic from multiple angles, future research to be conducted, the development plans for House of Arches Heritage Site centered repurposing the buildings and its surrounding areas for mixed use. The historical narrative behind House of Arches, which is how the mayor reiterates and invokes the site as a stop in the historical tour of Lid, becomes obscured in the urban renewal plans for the area, as project leaders, which again are municipal, national, urban renewal authorities, and the municipal economic department, emphasize new housing constructions and employment opportunities offered by the plans. So all of the presentation slides, again, the public-facing, how they're marketing this urban renewal project to the community, and we have one slide up here, the one over there with the bicycle. All of these presentation slides for this urban renewal project focus on, draw attention to the new constructions coming out of this project, which stand in distinct juxtaposition to the ways that the mayor highlights these areas when he draws attention to the historic element of these sites in other references to them and their surroundings. And I do want to note, when I first looked at that slide, I completely missed the heritage site that was sitting at the center, and my eye only caught the giant white buildings, which speaks, in my mind, speaks volume as to what this project is actually going towards. So, but important to note, though, there is a disjuncture between the presentation of these urban renewal plans in public-facing materials and the more technical urban renewal documents. within the land use maps for the urban renewal plans of House of Arches, which is the other image we have up on the slide. The old city, the structures of Khan el-Hello, the soap factory, and the House of Arches are denoted for preservation with a small red star. So while the public materials envelop these historical structures within the rhetorics of more economically valued mixed-use characteristics of the project, preservation cannot be understood as fully absent from the plans. So all of this representation and discourse around Lid as a historic ancient city seems to sideline the official classification of Lid as a mixed city, an identity that the municipality still upholds and values given how other public-facing presence defines the urban image of Lid as one that is open and pluralistic. The malleability of the mixed identity for Lid manifests in how and when the municipal offices choose to prioritize it as a premier identity for the city to espouse. We're calling it as a cliche mosaic when talking about the new Roman mosaic, but then, excuse me, not incorporating or developing this identity further. Through the lens of heritage management, excuse me, the municipality, the municipality fades the mixed city classification into the background. The answer to why the municipality has made this decision is one we can make conjectures around. Sorry. We can make conjectures around why, but it cannot be unearthed just through these public-facing materials. The municipality opts instead to forefront a temporal identity that heritage sites from various periods of history offer for the construction and branding of Lid as an ancient historical city. So again, I'm not upholding the mixed identity or the historic ancient city identity, but it's a question of why do things become prioritized one time or another, and the answer of why is not very abundantly clear in these public-facing materials, but can be excavated more thoroughly through an individual conversation. But what I wanted to do with this presentation is highlight the different ways that these discursive identities are ebbing and flowing in public-facing materials. So thank you.
شكرا مكارم على ورق.
Thank you, Mekarem. Thank you, Mekarem, for talking about the Lid city. And the last speaker is situated in one of the hotels in Amman, Jordan, and he's a dear friend, Dr. Hamid Salem. Dr. Hamid Salem is an archaeologist and an anthropologist as well. He studied in Birzeit and then a master's degree from Arizona from the USA and a doctorate from Leiden from the Netherlands. He is an assistant professor at the Birzeit University, and he teaches using different methodologies, especially when it comes to pottery, the Palestinian heritage, tourism, and the verbal history. And Dr. Hamid will be talking about safeguarding the Palestinian archaeological heritage in a pro-colonial stage. 20 minutes, please, Dr. Hamid. The floor is yours.
جميعا.
Good morning.
I will speak in Arabic because but the presentation will be in English. So in the publication. I am pleased to be with you even virtually.
طبعا
It is,
يسعد
could be nicer if I was there. لكن خليني أشكر أول شيء اللي دعوني
the organizers for inviting me, and especially to the team and the institute and the moderator. I will be talking about the enduring question of why the why it's important to safeguard the Palestinian archaeological heritage in pro-colonial stage. So, first of all, can this post-colonial term apply to Palestine or not? This is something we can discuss, but the site we focused on is Tel, and we start first of all by mentioning the geography and the geographical location of Palestine. The area of Palestine was as a country a whole, and then in 1967 the West Bank and Gaza were occupied. So basically, most of the discussion focuses on the West Bank after its occupation, when the name was changed from the West Bank to Judea and Samaria, and we know about Oslo agreement, which divided it into areas A, B, and C. All these areas are divided, and so far as the control is, we live in the areas under the control of the PA, and small islands surrounded by areas in brown, which is in the area C, and which is under the total control of Israel. We have no border exits as such, under the control of the Palestinian Authority without going through Israeli checkpoints. So therefore, Tel was impossible there for anyone to have any sort of geographical or civilizational continuity with Ramallah or Jerusalem, and cultural continuity. So the division constitutes a major problem, and of course for the heritage and archaeology, and we see how the different areas, I think in total there are around 6,000 archaeological sites, as you see from the dots on the map. And when we know the area is around 6,000 kilometers, so it's like a site per kilometer, so to speak. And this is why people now tend sometimes to destroy it or loot it or whatever. There are four main factors which impacted the cultural heritage. They are important for our understanding of the threats facing the cultural heritage. There are change factors which are linked factors which result in the destruction of the cultural heritage. I try to divide them into first the political situation and the governance, different types of governance over the years in Palestine. Secondly, lack of knowledge and ignorance, and the political and the social conditions and situation, and we should not forget the material and financial situation. Each of these elements constitute different threats, but at the end of the day can impact and influence each other. I have references that the political situation and the knowledge impact the environment and the economic situation. So it's difficult to have separation between these factors. They're all intertwined. So if there is illegal digging or looting or something, this can be the result of social conditions. And when you look for the reasons for these social conditions, then we find other elements. So most of the discussion in the paper investigate these influences. I don't want to repeat things that have been said by Ghattas and what's written in the literature, but there is a lot of linkage between settlement and archaeology and also with the material used by settlers and politicians to justify the Zionist ideology and settlement policies. We hear a lot of voices being raised about using the cultural heritage and the archaeological cultures to justify settlement. In some areas, this is the only justification. Hawara, for example, which has been in the news lately, Hawara is the Israelis say that this is a Jewish town which should be reoccupied again. This is the kind of mentality they spread amongst their youth. I know I don't have much time to discuss many things, but I want to present and propose the model I have and the different reasons for it. We have a site called Tell Tell, a project which started from 2015 to 2016. It was a joint project and a collaboration work between the BZ University and the Ministry of Tourism and Archaeology. Some of the funding came from Bergen University. The main objective was to rehabilitate the site and after destruction. This picture shows the old picture and the new image, and you see the surrounding area. The main problem we wanted to discuss is why the excavation work and digging took place in this area. Tel Tel is one of the oldest towns in Palestine and belongs to the Bronze Age. If it wasn't probably the first, a first town which was surrounded by fences after Jericho, and therefore it has distinguishes marks that separate it from other areas, and also because of the rapid buildings around it, and also another reason is we have different narratives about Tell and the linkage to the biblical narrative and of course this narrative can be refuted, but there was an accumulation of this discussion. We talked about the project, but with a quick review, the site saw a lot of excavation work one way or another. The first were done by Garstrong, who was in 1928 the head of the archaeology department in Palestine, and the Ghattas was a young scientist who studied in France, and she came from a non-biblical background, but she had nonetheless and Burundi ritual was also interested. So in my paper, I discuss the tell and the development of the archaeological narrative and and what Judith Market Krauss said that the main result for this that 2000, 2300 the last time it was occupied by people was 1300 BC and this contradicted the so-called biblical narrative. This was what was found, but most of the things have disappeared and nothing remains now. The main components is the system of defense, the three-wall system built around the site, and also the so-called safe haven or a chapel or a castle, one way or another, and there are some residential units, buildings from various periods of history in the lower parts of the site. These were amongst the most important remains that can be discussed in the period of 1930, which was very sensitive in Palestine from a political point of view and its relations to the archaeological diggings. There were other excavation work which were conducted by Campbell, the American archaeologist, in the 1960s, which ended in 1968, which also طبعا Judith Market Krauss's work. There is a distortion in the sound. There are many threats facing the site, which in the period post-excavation, and we should also discuss the post-colonial period or not, and whether or not these practices will continue or not. As you know, we have many different excavations which took place in Palestine around 900, one way or another, starting from the 1930s until the current phase, and these excavation works were aimed at finding evidence linked to the Bible and its narrative, so therefore we can classify them as just excavation work looking for archaeological or architectural evidence, or can we find evidence of another sort one way or another. The fact is, this leads me to a basic question, and that is, do we have the ability as archaeologists to conduct excavation now similarly to what happened in the past? I'll try and answer this question at the end of this intervention, and because of the nature of the site and the destruction which took place, and we can also mention other sites, and Tell Sultan, which is in Jericho, and other sites which saw in Tell Sultan 1865 was the beginning, and then the excavation work continued after that until around 1967, and that was stopped one way or another and resumed by an Italian And during this time, a lot of destruction happened to the site, which really was part and parcel of the mud brick walls to the walls. And there was a wall which was discovered in the Middle Bronze Age, and what remains of it is very little, and what will remain for future generations may be zero. And also from the remains, which saw a lot of wear and tear, the Jericho Tower, which suffered because of the change in the environment and during the weather conditions. There was an entire tower which saw a lot of destruction. Houses uh, disappeared. The chapel made of mud bricks. Tel Tel also is another example, and this site was neglected for about 85 years, one way or another, until our project came in 2015, and we saw how much damage took place to the walls and the fences, and as we saw in previous slides, and also the destruction of the flora, which used to now covers the site, and it contributed to the destruction of the site. And also in some parts of the site the destruction was total, and what remains now is piles of rubble and stone and nothing more, because of agriculture or irrigation or other impacts. And we see how the walls have disappeared with the passage of time because of the neglect suffered by this site, and how the towers no longer there. We saw the main part of the. Sorry to interrupt you. You have 3 minutes to conclude. What are the reasons for this destruction? Of course, the expansion by building and using bulldozers led to the destruction of Tel Sakra and Tel, and now we see part of the buildings which were erected inside the site because of mismanagement. Now we see how the cities are expanding, and the buffer zone is almost no longer there. And also the quality of the sound is very poor. We can hardly understand what the speaker is saying. The paper has more details, of course, and also the illicit excavation that Ghattas mentioned, and we see in the side how these illicit diggings continue, and sometimes they turned into dumping sites for refuse, and the sound is disconnecting. We have a problem with the sound. We have a problem. Your sound is disconnecting, doctor. Maybe this is because of the internet connection. It seems that we lost the connection. I don't know if you can hear us, doctor. Maybe there are outside interventions. Dr. Hamid, can you hear me? The other thing is we we excavated just to clarify certain things, but large part of our work, there's still a problem with the sound. Dr. Hamid, we have a problem. We cannot hear you. Yes, the sound is disconnecting. I'm sorry, maybe it's a problem with the internet. You, you have 1 minute if you can conclude. I'm sorry, I thought I had half an hour. Now you see from the images, but some excavation work we saw was for political reasons. We saw parts which are destroyed, and also some cleaning work which led to more destruction, and also there was uh, they use in Arabic the term society or community, but we have tried to organize workshops and awareness raising activities to reach out to the public to raise awareness. The aim is to leave an impact for the future generations and to raise their awareness of the importance of the protection of cultural sites and heritage sites. And we worked with the young generations and a way to educate them and train them maybe for the BZ University students, where 90 students receive training, and we hope that this generation in the future will be the generation which will protect these sites one way or another. And if you please allow me, we discussed the colonial heritage and post-colonial. There are 3 issues I can talk about in 1 minute, and the way the heritage department has still problems with their competency and specialization. So they should review the way they do their work, and also to use their administrative staff as researchers, for example. And also another problem is the clear linkage between the Palestinian narrative and the Israeli narrative. Some people think that we should have a Palestinian narrative which refutes the Israeli narrative. This leads us to many issues which can be counterproductive in the awareness of people. And I'm sorry about taking too much of your time. Thank you. I think our watches are not synchronized. I apologize, Dr. Hamid. I I gave you 20 minutes because we do not have time. We have another panel. Thank you, Dr. Hamid, for this intervention. We apologize for the disconnection. So anyway, this was towards the end, and we're glad we heard your point of view. We have about 15 minutes. Before we start, outside there is a photo exhibition of the destruction uh, faced by the area. I hope you can visit it. We have 15 minutes for questions and answers. We focused on Palestine mainly, but there are issues relating to colonial heritage, mismanagement, which are still linked to the colonial thing, because colonialism does not destroy artifacts and heritage, but it can destroy the minds of people also. We hear Dr. Ghattas and Dr. Hamid and Mekarem talked about the archaeology and the concept of mixed cities. I have a problem understanding that they are, we know this happened forcefully, like a lead when settlers were brought in. So they are mixed in a different sense. Of course, I understand you understand that. I don't want to take too much of your time. Now we open the floor for questions and answers.
Dr. Beverly. شكرا جزيلا.
The panelists, that
أشكر
really, truly excellent presentations, and sadly couldn't be more timely. And speaking of sort of recent events, my question relates directly to this concept of the mixed city and this sort of construction, in particular by the municipal authorities there. I'm interested to know in what way, or if at all, the events in Lid in May 2021 and more recent events in 2023, how are they explained, mediated, or are they simply just absented because it contradicts? So, you know, how is that reality mediated by the municipal authorities? And also, in what sense is the municipal part of the wider ideological construct of the state and the inexorable apartheid, extremist, racist construction of that state when mediated against a notion of a mixed city? Thank you.
ممكن ناخذ أكثر من سؤال وبنعمل أساس الوقت ضيق وبنعمل إجابات at once. تفضل دكتور.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Dr. Ghattas. Thank you very much for your presentation. You mentioned the increase of looting and plundering in Area A and other areas in the West Bank and Palestinian territories. I just wanted to know, I was wondering that your observation is based on the number of artifacts in, for example, the Old Jerusalem market, or if do you know if there is any documentation or research on the number of sites that have been looted recently, or how we can observe the pattern or increasing pattern, and if there is any program or project for monitoring Palestinian antiquities or artifacts in international market? How, because you mentioned the Old Jerusalem market, but I imagine that there's a huge international market. So how the monitoring of that market is happening, if it is happening at all? Thank you.
I think my question would be for Mekarem. Yesterday, I was talking to quite a few of our colleagues here, as well as yourself, about how we are able to ensure proper community engagement when it comes to post-conflict reconstruction. And, you know, it seems in some of the cases that I was talking about, and as well as others yesterday, particularly in Mosul, there's maybe a lot of miscommunication ongoing, which is resulting in reconstruction and rehabilitation, which is not agreeable to the local communities. When it comes to what you were talking about with the reconstruction programs, rehabilitation, or reimagining of urban cities, urban areas, is there any kind of best practice that you've come across, or any cases that you've come across where local engagement has been done well and correctly, or is this still very much an inherent problem?
So I first very much want to, I don't buy the mixed city identity. Sorry. Thank you for the questions. For the outset, I do not buy the mixed city identity that is placed there. But I think that the reason that I focus on this is because I think it is an important tool that is being used by the municipality. And so to your question about the recent events in Lid and how does the municipality, you know, come into play with this, how is this mixed identity trying to mediate? The reality is it's very much not. The mixed identity comes forward when the municipality sees it as advantageous. And I think this becomes incredibly present when you compare different mixed cities and when they choose to forefront the mixed identity. So when you look at Lid and the spaces in which the Lid municipality forefronts a mixed identity, it's happening in a very different circumstance when you look at Haifa. So this was the kind of, when I was coming to this work at looking at heritage, I was a little bit confused because it's like the pieces of heritage that exist in Lid very easily could discursively use this mixed identity in a way that presents it as something like, look, it's actually mixed, woohoo. But they then choose not to, which I found as the interesting element. And then to your point about how the municipality sits vis-a-vis the state as this whole apparatus, it is still something that I'm looking at in the future dissertation work. I think, again, Lid is a interesting case given the makeup of its municipal council. So there are 6 Palestinian members of the city council against 10 far-right council members, as well as a couple others that are either ultra-Orthodox or more centrist. But understanding the way that the changes of the Lid's council relate to the general rhetoric of the national government is something that I'm still trying to figure out the relationship with there. But assuredly, the mediation and excuse me, the use of this mixed identity to assuage fears and calm, quote unquote, divisions within the city are very much not. I couldn't see anything in the materials that like this is where we're going to recall this mixed identity to create a community. That was not present in what I've been finding. Yeah. And then Joe, to your question about proper community engagement, excuse me, I could not find an announcement of when these public presentations about the urban renewal the urban renewal projects were happening, which I think speaks volume of that the information about community engagement is not easily accessible. So I really, to give an example of good and proper community engagement, especially with these programs, I could not find an example of how the municipality was actually doing the community engagement. Many of the programs did have references to so there's a Chicago Center in Ramat Eshkol that is a community center, and so they had references to, oh, we're incorporating the Chicago Center, but how they were actually incorporating that was very absent from the conversation. So yeah, community engagement was not up at the forefront of how these urban renewal documents were happening. There was a conversation about, as new housing constructions were being built, the old ones need to be torn down, and so how are you going to contend with the fact that there are people still living in these houses? That conversation was not fleshed out in the materials, and so that's a huge element of community engagement, that you're literally displacing people from their homes to build these new complexes that are going to change the property values. And for the case of these spaces, often lower socioeconomic classes. So how are you going to do that? Absent from the conversation. So the community was relatively absent. Mm-hmm.
Do you hear me? Looting. The word itself describes the situation. It's a legal market. Everything happens in the dark. No one has actually control how many thousands of objects are moved, where they end up. No one knows how many sites are looted or basically revisited once after the others. If you go to the West Bank, wherever you go, just have a tour in the nature, you see the sites, and the destructions are incredible. So basically, I think that the best solution is to use the technology which is available today, like Google Maps, to use the aerial photos, to spot all these sites and try to visit the sites each year to see if there is activity or not. This is one of the solutions. The others, we can use the NGOs to go and watch all these sites which are in Area Cs, because the Palestinian authorities, they are not allowed to go there, whereas the NGOs, they are allowed, they can go there. As for the materials which are in the market, the middleman, who is usually an Israeli citizen, has to issue a license to export the object from Israel to the rest of the world. And in this license, he usually writes the origin of the object somewhere from the West Bank, somewhere from Hebron area, somewhere from Nablus area, and so forth. So we know they come from the West Bank. We know that they are looted, but we don't know actually from which site. And when they end up in New York or in London, they do exactly the same, originally from Hebron area and the period. So we can actually trace some of them, but we cannot trace all of them. It's unbelievable, or actually it is impossible, but we can trace some of them. This is the correct short answer that I can give you for the moment.
دكتور حامد، في عندك شيء بتحب تضيفه؟ يبدو انه الدكتور حامد مش
يعني
تفضل.
لا موجود سامعني.
تفضل سامعك.
بس على نفس الموضوع يعني غطاس اذا بتتذكر كان we had a lot of census about our estimates actually how many artifacts are looted, and they're estimated over 100,000 one day. And I think the Ministry of Tourism once attempted to make an inventory of the artifacts that existed there. Also, we had the database in the Department of Antiquity giving that number, the number of artifacts that was confiscated by the Palestinian police or the security is estimated to be over 120,000 or 130,000 artifacts. It's already on the storage and inventoried. And of course, I will agree with the issue of looting is a big issue on the news. But as you noticed, Israel is taking it and its excuse now to put its to govern, the antiquity in areas B and A. There is many incidents in my paper that I mentioned about them interfering on the job and work of the Palestinian antiquity officers. One of them happened just 2 weeks ago in Sabastia, where they stopped the Palestinian from excavation and told them, "You are not controlling these sites anymore. We are controlling them." And the Ministry of Culture responsible for tourism has issued a new law saying that all the archaeological site, meaning all areas, A, B, C, this kind of Oslo, things are under the Israeli control, basically on this. Now, the second control is directly by the settlers. Settlers is really a very big issue for us at the moment, not only for structural violence that is going there, but for their control of the archaeological sites and in each area and in each place, and for using this site to get, as Ghattas said, the sympathy of the normal Israelis. Because if you are belonging to a certain religion, you have to believe in your book somehow, and they use this to attract the sympathy of the normal Israelis and the Protestant, people, Protestant movement that agree with this kind of narrative. And they're doing, of course, many excavation. I called it in my paper clandestine archaeology, meaning you do these things against a principle of normal work that you should do against the international work, against international law, and against everything. And this is happening at the moment in many sites, and they are, of course, using all of them the biblical narrative that we have to be there and we have to present our work in different ways. So when I discuss the governance, I discuss that we are really living in very unique situation. Not you find it in the world where a place is governed by 6 or 7 laws. The Israeli law, you have the Israeli basic law that govern in the Israel, the military laws imposed what they call the Judea and Samaria officers. You have the settler law now, which is the jungle law, meaning any settler can have his own law and interpret it the way they want. And the third, of course, is the Jordanian law that is used by the officers, the British law, the Ottoman law, and recently in 2018 we have the Palestinian law. So we have governance, conflicting governance, paradoxing, and attempts to claim the land in different ways. And the looting is contextually should be put like this, Ghattas. We should see the looting as in the general picture, whereas Israeli are doing illicit excavation using Palestinian workers. They make temptation for them. They told them, we have an example at Talqila. When we did the oral history at Talqila, people told us, okay, we are asked to dig this site to look for certain artifacts. Asked by whom? By the Israeli mediator. So when we dig up, and they have to re-excavate also some site that they looted in the second and third intifada, etc. During the certain period they used it, and they start looking for what we call the bolla, the certain stamp that they thought they missed it from the previous excavation. So when the Israelis are making a big issue in the news about Palestinian looters and they make arrest and it's a big story, they come to us and loot the artifacts, they never mention any Israeli that are connected to this. They never stop. We never heard anything. The looted artifacts that are crossing the border being stopped by the Israeli military. You heard a lot of confiscating meat, vegetables, humans, etc. But have we ever heard that the Israeli checkpoint has stopped these thousands of artifacts crossing their checkpoints, since they are very accurate and very thin? So that's kind of things has to. That's kind of things that is. I'm sorry, I'm taking so much time, but this is how it should be discussed. I think not in an isolated cases.
طيب شكرا دكتور حامد. يعني الدولة كلها مبنية على فكرة.
The state, as a matter of fact, has been built on the idea of looting. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. Sorry, we have a coffee break, a short one, because we're supposed to begin in 3 minutes, but hopefully we'll begin in 10 minutes. A 10-minute break, thank you.